over the world, say where you'll find an island there, so lovely small, with nations free, with people French and Dutch, though talking English much, as they say Martin in the sea. Oh, sweet Sint Maarten land, so bright by beach and strand, with sailors on the sea and harbors free, where the chains of mountains gleam variously in sunlight sheen. Oh, I love that paradise, nature's beauty very nice. Oh, I love that paradise, nature's beauty very nice. How pretty between green, flamboyant, gleam of flowers red, by sunlight set, like cows and sheep and goats in meadows or roads, thy donkeys keen, can't I forget? Oh, sweet Sint Maarten land, so bright, my beach and strand, with sailors on the sea and harbors free, where the chains of mountains gleam variously in sunlight sheen. Oh, I love that paradise, nature's beauty very nice. Oh, I love that paradise, nature's beauty very nice. Oh, I love that paradise, nature's beauty very nice. Oh, I love that paradise, nature's beauty very nice, nature's beauty very nice, nature's beauty very nice.
We have now reached the midpoint of our virtual commemoration, and we would like to take a moment for reflection and revisit how St. Maarten was able to achieve its goal of constituent country within the Kingdom of the Netherlands. In this segment, we spoke to key persons in our community that contributed to the success of 10-10-10. During this segment, we will get to know these individuals and the roles they played.
I am Eugene Holiday. I'm the governor of St. Maarten. In fact, I have been the governor of St. Maarten since October 10th, 2010, and in that respect, the first governor, and I'm currently serving in my second term. With that, I'm very thankful that you have decided to give some attention to this particular process, which I believe is very important for our future generations to understand how things came about to realize and accomplish country status. It is important that we look back and realize that country status did not start with the 2000 referendum. The quest for country status, or actually, which I would more refer to as the quest for self-governance, in fact, started way back in the 1800s. When you study the history of Sint Maarten, you would see that prominent Sint Maarteners, such as William Romney, already in 1864, or Josiah Wyatt, or Weymouth, as far back as 1911, or other prominent Sint Maarteners like Lionel Bernard Scott in the 1930s and 40s, and Claude Watty in the 1980s, all were proponents of self-governance, or a greater degree of self-governance for Sint Maarten. So it is really a accumulation of events or factors that have led to this stage that we are in today. Also, there was in the 1991 the motion of the Island Council, for which basically was passed unanimously to have full internal self-government for Sint Maarten.
My name is Ralph Richardson, not so known in Sint Maarten, and I was a civil servant for years in Aruba. I did my engineering study. I'm a mechanical engineer by profession, and after working 7-8 years with the government of Aruba, I was head of the government safety department in Aruba. This federal government safety department in Aruba, because the safety department fell under the Department of Labor, and the Department of Labor in Aruba is a central government department. 1978, I came to Sint Maarten. I joined a law firm here, Gibson and Duncan. I worked there for a while as three partners. And in 1981, I was asked by a good friend of mine, the then Prime Minister of the Netherlands Antilles, Mr. Don Martina, if I wanted to become Lieutenant Governor in Sint Maarten, because they were looking for someone, to take over the 1st of September 1981. 1973, there was an election in Aruba, federal government election. And the Young Party, the MEP, won that election landslide. Now, that party then joined with the larger party in Curaçao, and they formed a government. And the MEP party joined that government with one objective, simple one objective, to obtain the separate status of Aruba. They signed a government accord with that in it, that this government will work on the separate autonomy of Aruba. It didn't work out, government fell, new elections and what have you. That was the beginning for Aruba. Then, in 1977, there was another federal government election, and again, the MEP party won that election in Aruba, landslide. The formateur of the government, of that new government to be formed, was the late Mr. Roosendaal. His party, the DP, won election in Curaçao. And he decided up front, I will not deal before a formateur or informateur was appointed by the governor of the Netherlands Antilles. He decided he will not join in any kind of government with the MEP, because the MEP is working on the disintegration on the Netherlands Antilles. This thing about status aparte and autonomous is all nonsense. Nowhere. Thus he decided he will not even talk to the MEP after elections what a informateur or a formateur is supposed to do. He talked with all the parties. came to Aruba, refused to talk to, and what the MAP did, and I was part of it, I'm proud to say I was part of it, the MAP called a general strike in Aruba. That was in August 1977. You see the march we had here 2 weeks ago? There was a march like that in Aruba. The strike started with this enormous march. When I say a march, everybody from Aruba, no matter what political party you were, what denomination, you had a joint group of people, the churches, schools, the teachers, they went on strike. And that strike was announced by the late Betico Cruz. We're going on strike because they don't want to form government with us. They don't even want to even talk to us. For 5 days, Aruba was locked down. No water, no electricity, no nothing, no planes coming in. The airport was closed down by the central government. No boats coming in, closed down by the central. Aruba survived those 5 days. The Dutch sent down a minister to talk to Aruba. And in 1977, there were meetings organized in the Netherlands, and there is where the separate status for Aruba started. September 1977, when the kingdom government decided we're taking these people serious, we're going to work on the separate status, or on the future, on the independence of Aruba, because there was a referendum in Aruba in March 1977. That referendum was asking two questions: whether Aruba wanted to become independent or want to be part of a federation with the central government, with Curaçao. 92% of the electorate went out to vote. 85% voted in favor of the independence of Aruba. Okay? And that was the start, that was the shock that was needed.
My name is Richard Gibson. I've been born in Aruba, moved to Sint Maarten in '69, and spent all my life up to now on Sint Maarten. The commemoration of the obtaining of our separate status is a story that I think some people forget and we should rehash. Why? When? What were the issues? And it's not something that happened overnight from one day to the other, but it was a long process. In 1973, the central government of the then Netherlands Antilles organized a referendum. And the questions in the referendum was, do we want to stay in the Netherlands Antilles? Do we want to become independent? Do we want to have any other status? 90% of the people under that central government organized referendum voted to stay in the Netherlands Antilles. Of course, to convince people, certain promises were made at the time, because already there were tensions, and those tensions surrounded money, which is the root of all evil. The central government has duties and obligations towards all the islands, and was not taking care of those obligations. Besides that, the islands were growing up. They were no longer little children. The islands wanted authority for themselves, to take charge of certain aspects of government. So from that confusion came, well, let us find out, if the islands really wanted to stay in the Netherlands Antilles, and they voted to stay. It didn't take long, though, that many of the promises to divest certain agencies of the central government to the islands did not come to fruition. In the meantime, more and more what you saw is that less and less attention was being paid to the welfare of the islands. I'll mention you one or two examples. Safety is something that's essential for every country and every citizen. Things had deteriorated to such a point on Sint Maarten that the police department we had was unable to meet the basic needs of safety towards the citizens of Sint Maarten. In fact, the most dramatical example is that at a certain point, the police department had one vehicle. And it was a vehicle that they rented from a local car rental company.
My name is Dennis Leroy Richardson, and I am at this moment a pension, and I have been the gezaghebber, as used to say, the lieutenant governor of Sint Maarten from the year up to the year 2000, 1994 to 2000, 6 years. And at the end of that period, I became the program manager for our goal to achieve country status in Sint Maarten. That has been my position for quite a while. And after that, I've served my country in different roles as a member of the Kingdom Council of State, as a member of the Council of Advice of Sint Maarten, as a Minister of Justice, and as an advisor on different topics in the past years. In the period that I was back in Sint Maarten as Lieutenant Governor, I stopped calling it Lieutenant Governor because in the American system, it is the assistant to the governor. And in our situation, it is more like a mayor or a governor itself. So, so I did. I returned in 1994. And that was the time when Sint Maarten was under higher supervision. The island was put under higher supervision in the time from Prime Minister Poirier because of bad management of the government. And my task, and that was the charge that I received, I was appointed gezaghebber, governor, was to do whatever is necessary to end the higher supervision by making changes in the government of Sint Maarten, ranging from the organization of the government to the establishment of policies and laws that would kind of also take the governing of Sint Maarten out of a kind of individual decisions based on whether your family, friends, whether they like you or not like you, but based on the rule of law. That is what I was charged with in doing when I came in 1994 as a gezaghebber of Sint Maarten.
My name is William Marlin, and talking about 10-10-10, when Sint Maarten became one of the constituent states in the Kingdom of the Netherlands, one would say, what role did you play? I've played several roles. The referendum actually began with the first referendum in 1994. At that time, I was a commissioner, just became commissioner in 1994 to the period of 1995. The late Vance James Jr. was the leader of the party then, and the party was also in the central government. That's how I was not in the central government. I gave up my seat to become a commissioner. And then Member of Parliament Roland Duncan, he assumed that seat in Parliament. We were also supporting the central government. So the central government then headed by the late Prime Minister Miguel Pourier, he was pushing for a restructured Netherlands Antilles. That was actually the name of his party, Party for the Restructuring of the Netherlands Antilles. Vance and Roland were supportive of a restructured Netherlands Antilles. I actually was not. I thought we've had enough of it. It was a station passé. We should move on. But on the other hand, I was also always a party person, a party loyalist, if you would want to call it. So I did not want to rock the boat. And one time during an interview, I can remember skillfully dodging the bullet. And the interviewer asked me, why I was not on the campaign trail and if I was not supporting the restructuring of the Netherlands Antilles. And my answer to him was that I am a commissioner in the government of Sint Maarten. I'm dedicated to Sint Maarten. And whether we are independent Sint Maarten, we would need roads, schools, homes. We would need an educational system. Whether we are a restructured Antilles, the same would apply. And even if we become an independent Sint Maarten, the same would apply. So I am leaving the decision up to the people. And lo and behold, the outcome was a restructured Netherlands Antilles. That was 1994. Would I do the same thing today in 2020? Absolutely not.
I'm Roland Duncan. I'm a lawyer. On the 14th of September this year, I made 46 years practicing law. So you know how close the age is to retirement. As a matter of fact, it's past retirement. Anyway, as a practicing lawyer, I've been involved with advising government, etc. And only in 1994 did I get involved in, let's call it, direct politics. Otherwise than that, I was a lawyer. I was called on government in several different times, several different situations to provide legal support, legal advice, etc. In 1994, I was convinced to go in politics. And we got elected that year and to the Parliament of the Netherlands Antilles. Why I mention this is that in that particular period, there had been a referendum in Curaçao in which option A had won. Option A to keep the Antilles together. So as a proponent of such, I went to Parliament representing Sint Maarten. My party, the SPA at the time, had won the election, so we had 2 representatives. And most of the time it was Mr. James and I, and thereafter Ms. Felicia James. In that period of Parliament, there was a movement or a book, a grouping, a commission was put together to see how best the Antilles could stay together and be governed. A report was made, and never forget the word, Make It Work was the name of the report. And that report showed that while the Antillean islands wanted to stay together, the largest island, Curaçao, did not particularly budge in terms of representation. And a lot of people talk about the good old Antillean days. However, one of the things that Sint Maarten has been fighting for is to get recognition, to grow up.
I started out as a civil servant, but before that, my educational background gave me a great opportunity to contribute to Sint Maarten's development. I studied in the Netherlands. I have my master's degree in political science and public administration. And when I came back, that gave me the opportunity to be the first chairwoman of the referendum of Sint Maarten in 1994. You asked, what were the sentiments at the time. So back 1994, the discussions were already taking place with regards to the constitutional changes between the islands and the Netherlands, the islands of Curaçao, Sint Maarten, Aruba, and at the time, Sable Station, Bonaire. So, but we never had a referendum before. So in 1994, and the period before that, the sentiments of the people, the governments, we had senators at the time representing us in the Parliament of the Netherlands Antilles, and Sint Maarten felt left out. Sint Maarten felt at the time that we were not getting our fair share of the taxes and getting the fair share of the taxes, and they decided, the government at the time, the senators at the time, the commissioners at the time, decided to continue to pursue our right of self-determination.
I am Sarah Westcott Williams, currently a member of Parliament for Sint Maarten, so one of the 15 members of Parliament. However, I have served during the period of being an island territory, so when Sint Maarten was part of the Netherlands Antilles. And thus, as commissioner during those days, I have also held several portfolios. A very important one for this interview is the portfolio of constitutional affairs, to which we will come back. I consider myself to have been very fortunate, and I was humbled by being able to serve the new country, Sint Maarten, as its first prime minister for a period of 4 years. However, in order to have reached that milestone of 2010 as country Sint Maarten, a lot had to happen during the years leading up to 10-10-10. Many persons have contributed during those years in order for us, on that moment of the 10th of October 2010, to call ourselves country Sint Maarten within the Dutch Kingdom.
Coming up next, we have 2 performances by Faiza Tabasamu and Lorenzo Gomez. Please stay with us.
Suoliga. Suoliga is a woman with rock wall plaits in her hair and white sand painted on her toes. I know her. I come from her belly, lived on her body, smelled the yeasting of her pond, her breast milk gone. Her lips are liquid red and her fingers cannot hold a pen. They are brittle from picking sour diamonds from the water in her tub. Suoliga isn't who she used to be. She is slipping away from me. Most of her children don't look back. Most don't see her dull, expressionless eyes. Once, I begged her to tell me her story. So she opened her mouth, but there was a black pool of blood saturating the space where her tongue was. Suoliga has remembered me. I am one of her daughters, and the fire in my tongue will speak for her.
If you've just joined us, you are watching the 10th anniversary virtual commemoration of 10-10-10 under the theme Decadal Growth and Progress. In this segment, we explore the arguments and the case for St. Maarten seeking a new constitutional status to increase its autonomy.
St. Maarten was part of the roundtable conferences, 81, 82. I was member of the delegation. I was lieutenant governor in the meantime. I was a member of the delegation of St. Maarten as advisor. St. Maarten had a small delegation of 3 or 4 people, and of that delegation I was an advisor. After that, the roundtable conference, like I said, Aruba obtained a separate status. There was a little standstill because what we were doing then, I was Minister of Constitutional Affairs too for a while, we were preparing the separate status of Aruba. The central government had to do that. The Minister of Constitutional Affairs, Aruba had to do its own thing. Aruba was working very hard in preparing its institutions and its departments and so forth. But in the meantime, the central government, the Department of Constitutional Affairs, had to prepare, had to execute the decisions that were taken at the Roundtable Conference to get to Aruba's separate status on the 1st of January 1986, 3 years' time. So Aruba had its work cut out for it, and the central government had its work. We had to execute what was agreed upon in March 1983. And that happened. The execution, the final execution of those what we call consensus points that we arrived at the Roundtable Conference, the execution thereof was Aruba's separate status on the 1st of January 1986. And then after that, we continued with the preparation of the restructuring of the Netherlands Antilles. Sint Maarten was part of that, in different meetings, different delegations of Sint Maarten were formed, and we were part of all those meetings, and I was part of that as advisor to the Sint Maarten delegation. Most of it just before the 10-10-10. Again, Sint Maarten had different committees put together to work on the preparation.
I want to call it a major mistake was made when Aruba left in 1986. At that time, with Aruba leaving, Aruba used to have 8 seats in parliament. So when Aruba left, how would these 8 seats be shared? At that time, the political leadership of Sint Maarten said, well, we only want 3. Why? Because we want to have quality as opposed to quantity. In my calculations, Sint Maarten should have got 5 out of the 8 and give 1 to Bonaire, 1 to Saba, 1 to Statia, looking at their population. And while Sint Maarten was not that big, but Sint Maarten had an economy that could justify that. What's the difference? What's the big deal? With 5 seats, Sint Maarten would command, for instance, 2 ministers as opposed to just 1 minister. Because the calculation base at that time was 2 seats would get you a minister. If with 5 seats, a party on Sint Maarten winning the election would get 3 seats. Now, that didn't happen. Sint Maarten remained with 3 seats in the Antilles. That I'm talking 86 coming on. So everybody who would win the elections, you would get 2 seats against 1 in opposition. And the only time that we ever had a landslide victory that one party got the total 3 seats was in 2009, 10. 2000, that election in January of 2010, the SPA won all 3 seats, which gave it 2 ministers, myself and another gentleman, Mr. Illich. This is leading up to the situation why, after referendum of saying let's stay together, it still fell apart. Why? Because politics, participation, one of the problems we have nowadays is how much say does one get in a democracy.
Many persons recall the 2000 referendum. It was really a defining moment for Sint Maarten. You would remember that the date of the referendum was the 23rd of June 2000. However, that was not the first date that was established for that referendum. In fact, if you look at the timeline, I want to go back for a moment to the 1994 referendum. That referendum was organized by the country, the Netherlands Antilles, of which we were part. And there's also a history behind that date of 1994. And again, I'm going even a little further back, because during the late 1980s, at that time, I did not hold a political position. I held the position of civil servant And as such, I was advisor to the different commissioners of constitutional affairs. And so, in the late 80s, I was part of, as a civil servant, of a delegation traveling to the Netherlands to negotiate, if you please, independence for Sint Maarten. After many years of discussing it here locally, at that time, the government, remember we were an island government, decided to go and champion the interests of Sint Maarten, and according to the political views of that time, that interest was for Sint Maarten to become independent. Of course, you could imagine the skepticism with which we were received in the Netherlands. Nevertheless, a sort of a framework was drawn up, steps that needed to be taken by Sint Maarten in order to become independent. This particular document, I am sure, is still in the archives of government. However, what that did as well, in my opinion, was to put more of a magnifying glass on Sint Maarten in terms of what we were doing and how we were doing it. Sint Maarten, as part of the Netherlands Antilles, and I realize I keep going back a little, but Sint Maarten, as part of the Netherlands Antilles, we had to fend a lot for ourselves. People might have forgotten this, but many of our legislation, and you will see how relevant this will become when we start to discuss our drive towards 10-10-10, but many of our relevant legislations were actually done on the level of the Netherlands Antilles. So in other words, on the level of the central government. To mention a few, tax legislation was something that was regulated for the most part, I need to add, on a federal level. Education legislation, so what kind of systems we would have in our education were also regulated on a federal level. Central level, some call it, others call it a federal level. In the area of health, also, legislation for the most part was on that central level. So Sint Maarten was constantly facing a dilemma of when would what we considered necessary changes, be it in the area of taxes, education, or health, when would these changes have been made?
Back before 1994, when we had that first referendum, 1993 in Sint Maarten was a very trying time as well. We had a lot of crime. There were bank robberies, I have to say that, because if you check in the newspapers, you would see that. And at the time, we never had our own Minister of Justice. Our Minister of Justice at the time was Mr. Knoppel, if I'm not mistaken. This was 1993, so before the referendum of 1994. So the discussions were going back and forth with regards to how Sint Maarten was being represented and if we were getting our fair share in developing our nation under the Antilles flag. I remember a sentence that Mr. Knoppel said at the time as Minister of Justice, and when Sint Maarten asked for assistance, and if my memory serves me correct, he stated, "Nipa nos mes nothing." So we don't even have for ourselves. And that was at a time when Sint Maarten really needed help from the police, judicial help to really curb the rising crime at the time, 1993. If my memory serves me right, the result at the time was status quo, which meant staying within the Netherlands Antilles. And there were different proposals that were submitted at the time, restructuring of the Netherlands Antilles. There was a party in Curaçao, the PAR, P-A-R, Pro Antillas Reestructurar. So those were the sentiments. They did a very good campaign from their side to say, hey, no, we should stay together and work on those issues that brought animosity between the governments, not between the people, between the governments, in regards to how we shared the tasks and responsibilities that would benefit the people of Sint Maarten. And a few days later, so I feel that the decision makers at the time didn't really take the heed on really working on that restructuring process that would keep us stronger together. It didn't work out. I think it is for the future generations to really go deeper into that and analyze why that didn't happen. So the result was, in the year 2000, not even 6 years later, we had a new referendum. And that is where the people chose, the majority of the people chose, I think it is 69%, almost 70% that chose to separate from the Antillean constellation and become a country within the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Similar to that, so status, similar to that of Aruba.
The period from 1994 to 1997, major things took place. Firstly, the country was in trouble. Just as we are today, the country was in deep, deep trouble. And radical measures needed to be taken. So salaries were cut, people were held back from getting promotions, etc. And it started that situation. For the first time ever, Sint Maarten was called on to contribute to the finances of the Netherlands Antilles. It had been one time before that, years ago, but that was refused, rejected by Sint Maarten. Anyway, the turnover tax, as we all know it, came into being for the 1st of January 1997, and it was a simple deal. 3%, of which 1% would go to Sint Maarten, 1/3, and the other 2/3 to the federal government. Up to today, there are politicians who disagree with that and who find that's nonsense. They hate the turnover tax, but I think the turnover tax is one of the stablest taxes that Sint Maarten has. Anyway, many decisions were taken back in the Antillean days between 94 and 97, of which we were part of. And one of the problems was that the government was in trouble, didn't have any money. Holland at that point in time offered to assist and never paid up.
The United Nations in a study had determined that a small economy, for it to be able to have sustainable development, the debt to GDP percentage should be around 35 to 40% of GDP. 35 to 40%. We're talking here at that time to somewhere around 97% of GDP in debts. You would say, well, let it be so, the central government, that's Curacao, but it doesn't work that way. Since we were part of the Netherlands Antilles, every time that debt goes up, Sint Maarten and every citizen has to take for its account its share in the debts that were being built up. Debts being built up not for investments or monies that came and benefited Sint Maarten, quite the contrary. It was only benefiting the economy and the companies in Curacao. The government used to borrow money from the banks, paying interest rates somewhere around 8%. Actually, the banks loved the government at the time because they didn't have to worry about lending money to somebody else. They had the government that always came, the government of Curacao, the central government, who borrowed from them, and the banks became wealthy. They were happy. The debt grew so high that it became impossible to repay. And that's when everybody panicked. If you have debts, and from your normal activities, no matter what you do, you will not be able to repay those debts, then you go knocking on the doors of Holland, of the Netherlands. In the interim, like I was mentioning before, those things that we had a right to, the basic debts and services that we should get from a government, from the departments that were run by the central government, those services deteriorated to a laughable level, whether it was sports department, I mentioned the police before, I mentioned, or they were all of the central government departments in Sint Maarten simply did not function. So that created a lot of dissatisfaction here. And since the outlook was that we cannot repay these debts, the only solution was to knock on the doors of Holland. And that's when the discussion started. And the concern about the functioning of the Netherlands Antilles as a country, whether it had surpassed its usefulness and whether we should not be thinking of a different constitutional format.
Again, reflecting on the timeline, I believe that 1995 was a turning point in the discussions about what do we want to be as Sint Maarten. Remain an island territory of the Netherlands Antilles, become a country within the Dutch kingdom, or even become independent, because those are usually the options that are offered. And I think that in looking at the period 1995, 1996, around that same time, for us, the focus at that time was the Hurricane Louis and what it had done to Sint Maarten. But on a federal level, the finances of the Netherlands Antilles were severely under pressure. And with organizations such as the IMF, the Antillean government needed to embark on, as we call it, a structural adjustment program, so a SAP. And one of the things coming out of this structural adjustment program was there should be some kind of a tax that would yield a good amount of money for the coffers of the then Netherlands Antilles. What did you have? Turnover tax. You must remember, and if you do not, I will remind you of a statement that became very important. And on to the day of today, it is sometimes referred to. And that was, and it was in the context that I was just explaining, but that statement was, hurricane or no hurricane, Sint Maarten has to pay taxes. And so, on the political level, the discussion about the turnover tax, which was again a federally imposed tax, was about how can Sint Maarten turnover tax be different than the tax on Curaçao. And indeed, in the drafting of those laws, the Sint Maarten turnover tax got a different twist to it, because at the time we were saying, but with a turnover tax, you're going to affect negatively our duty-free status. So we had our 1994 referendum. Persons choose in the majority to remain part of the Netherlands Antilles. And then we had a hurricane, and we had what was happening on a federal level. So it's around that very time, actually, that on Sint Maarten, voices started to go up again for another constitutional referendum. And this puts me right into the path of preparing for another constitutional referendum on Sint Maarten that ultimately resulted to be the one on the 23rd of June, 2000.
The restructuring of the Netherlands Antilles did not work. Fast forward now, I was again in government in the period of 1998, 1999, and I became leader of the party. Vance James had stepped down as leader. I became leader of the party. And I then decided to push the agenda for a new referendum because we needed to get out of the Netherlands Antilles. We could not continue being remotely governed by Curacao that had a majority in the parliament, that had a majority in the Council of Ministers, and that's where the decisions were made. So we wanted out, we wanted to be like Aruba, we wanted what they called a separate status. If I would rewind a bit and go back to 1994, a lawyer, a constitutional lawyer from St. Kitts, I can't remember his name, he drafted the advice for the party then and presented it to the then leader, Vance James Jr. And I can fully recall it was full internal self-government and sovereign association. I don't think many of us or any of us really understood the true depth of it. Because lo and behold, today, 26 years later, is actually what Sint Maarten, if you'd want to call it, is fighting for. That full internal self-government in sovereign association, because we do not have that full internal self-government. The separate status that we have acquired is not what it's supposed to have been. 1998, when I became leader of the party, we were pushing for a new referendum again. And in 2000, the referendum was held. And I can remember then too, a historical photo was taken in front of the old government building with the late Vance James Jr., who had formed his own party and had one seat, the leader of the Democratic Party, Mrs. Sarah Westcott Williams, and myself, leader at the time of the SPA. And the headline that appeared was all three united for option 3. And option 3 was separate status. So the political leaders of Sint Maarten at that time did not hold individual rallies. It was not a party campaign. It was a campaign for Sint Maarten. And we convinced the majority of the people to vote to leave the Netherlands Antilles. We got our wish, the people supported their leaders, and separate status had a resounding victory. However, it is important to note that independence scored highest in Sint Maarten in 1994 and increased, I think, again in 2000. The number of people wanting independence or voting for independence increased.
It is in that period, in the period of the 90s, where we already had a referendum earlier in the decade of the 90s, what I think played a significant role in the vote for country status was the decision of the federal government following the devastation of Hurricane Lewis to introduce turnover tax on Sint Maarten. That triggered a lot of discussion because it was introduced over the protest on Sint Maarten. And as you would see, the actual Island Council motion that actually called for the referendum was already taken in October of 1998. So all of this was really, and also when you look back at the entire history, was that quest based on the fact that there was this feeling that the centralization of government and decision-making in Willemstad basically neglected the interest of Sint Maarten.
Coming up next, we have 3 performances by Helen Hart, Shorensli Valise, followed by Notori Illich and Betty V.
disaster overpowering our lives, and yet many days of heartache and much pain. The light don't seem so bright to shine the way. The bitterness, intense resentfulness.
Our days were counted, we were so afraid. The darkness fast to leave trailing the light. Our lives are not for us to dwell within. At break of day we found no more existence. Yes, we have overcome consternation. So beautiful. Our people have strived, struggled, endeavored for lovely St. Maarten. The fresh inventive sunshine warms our waters, the brightest white sand beach you've ever seen. The grass so green, our flowers sing delighted. A new hope born within each one of us. A bright new life we're looking forward to. A positive prediction we demand. Generations to develop from ancestors. To love, adore, admire, and respect. Yes, we have overcome. So beautiful. Our people have strived, struggled, endeavored for lovely St. Maarten. Yes, we have overcome consternation. Good world was here. We'll fire our chins up high. A brand new island, enchanting, so beautiful. Our people have strived, struggled, endeavored for lovely St. Maarten. Yes, we have overcome consternation. Good world was here. We'll fire our chins up high. A brand new island, enchanting, so beautiful. Our people have strived, struggled, endeavored for lovely St. Maarten.
After making the case for why St. Maarten should have more autonomy, the referendum of June 23, 2000 was a major step forward to achieving the goal of country status on October 10, 2010.
What is important to remember is that that leading up to the referendum of June 23, 2000, there was a lot of discussion. There was a lot of discussion on whether or not Sint Maarten was ready and capable to carry the responsibilities of country. And the referendum committee at the time approached me, because that was even before the referendum, with the, to be a part of a three-man financial expert group to prepare the financial consequences or the impact of the financial consequences of all of the options in the referendum. And we concluded this, the three-man expert, financial expert group, which consisted of myself, Mr. Martin Hussink, and Mr. Case Rocks. And we concluded that of the four options, which were status quo, restructured Netherlands Antilles, country status, or independence, that all of the options, in effect, were manageable. And those, and based on those results of that study, we assisted the referendum committee in the information sessions to inform the people so they can take an informed decision. There was also a referendum committee, which consisted of its chairman, Richard Gibson, as well as Dennis Pontiflet and Mr. Richardson. Mr. Richardson. So Clarence Richardson, that is. So in that respect, the processes, looking at the processes that were put in place, the Island Council had taken a decision following the referendum in July of 2000, where the Island Council had, on the Sint Maarten level, because we had various levels, the Sint Maarten level, we had a permanent committee for constitutional affairs. We had a political steering group, and we had the work group for constitutional affairs. The permanent committee for constitutional affairs consisted of all members, all 11 members of the Island Council at the time. The political steering group consisted of the leaders of the political parties represented in the Island Council. And over the 10-year period, you would see that the composition of that political steering group changed from 2000 until 2003. The composition was Sarah Westcott Williams as the leader of the Democratic Party, William Marlin as the leader of the National Alliance, and Mr. Vance James Jr., the late Vance James Jr., as the leader of the NPP at that time. And in 2003, following the Island Council elections, the composition changed, and the political leaders then became Ms. Westcott Williams as leader of the Democratic Party, William Marlin as the leader of the National Alliance, and Ms. Gracita Arundel as the leader of the PPA. And following the elections in 2007, the political steering group was comprised of William Marlin and Westcott Williams as the two parties that were in the Island Council. So with that, you have an idea of the political processes or structures that existed. But in addition to that, we had on the island level, the Sint Maarten level, we also had the Work Group of Constitutional Affairs. And the Work Group of Constitutional Affairs, which was appointed shortly after the referendum, was comprised of seven members, of which I was one of the members, and Roland Duncan was the first chairman of the Work Group Constitutional Affairs. Following his resignation, I was appointed as chairman in March of 2002, and other members on the work group were Joan de Vallemate, who was the secretary to the work group, Gaston Bell, Gracita Arundel, Louis Duzonzon. All right, so and Franklin Richards was briefly a member of the work group, and then he became lieutenant governor and left the work group. So those were the three let's say the three, there's the Permanent Committee for Constitutional Affairs, the Political Steering Group, and the Work Group Constitutional Affairs. And my role was within the technical side of work group, where we were responsible for the preparation of all the technical documentation for the negotiations on the technical level, as well as advising and supporting the political leaders at particular meetings. But on the Netherlands Antillean level, we also had a number of processes, and one of those processes was, for example, the committee for the joint central bank. And in that committee, I was co-chairman of that particular committee that prepared the joint central bank, which is today the Central Bank of Curaçao and Sint Maarten. On the kingdom level, we also had another organizational structure which comprised of the project group finance, the project group law enforcement and constitutional affairs, the kingdom political steering group, where that functioned for all of the many meetings we had on a administrative level, political administrative level, and there was also a coordinating group that prepared those meetings. And I was, during that period, the chairman, or co-chairman, or I should say, rotating chairman of the project group finance, because what we had was that depending on which island or if the Netherlands, that the meetings were held, that country chaired the meeting. And in the project group finance, I was assisted by Joan de Valemate, Martin Hassink, and Hiro Shigimoto, to name a few persons. Dennis Richardson, on the other hand, was the chairman of the project group, at least the rotating chair of the project group on behalf of Sint Maarten, for constitutional affairs and law enforcement. And I often assisted him in those meetings as well, where that is concerned. And I was also a member of the, as I said earlier, the coordinating group that prepared the Kingdom Political Steering Group meetings. I was a member on behalf of Sint Maarten. So as you can see, I was essentially, I participated in all of the levels, whether it was a Sint Maarten level, the Netherlands Antilles level, or the Kingdom level, or and the final level was the RTC, because you also had the roundtable conference process. And for the roundtable conference process, the structure was we had a preparatory committee roundtable conference, and you had a roundtable conference itself. And on behalf of Sint Maarten, I was a member of the preparatory committee for the roundtable conferences that helped prepare the roundtable conferences. So overall, I would say I held many caps in my official capacity, and the main one was as chairman of the Work Group Constitutional Affairs, and in doing so assisted the political leaders in the negotiations that were at times extremely tense.
The reaction in Sint Maarten was more of pushing away Curaçao than pushing away the Netherlands, really. That if you really go back into the time, you would see that was really the big it wasn't said because you didn't want to insult your brother and sister in Curaçao, but that was the push. The other is that we could decide our own affairs, but that in fact wasn't really new for Sint Maarten. And under the old government, under the Netherlands Antilles, Curaçao didn't really interfere into the local business and politics. It was a laissez-faire, laissez-aller. I mean, at a distance, and because that was also politically motivated. the crucial political parties often needed the politicians in Sint Maarten to form a government because of the fact that they didn't agree with each other. So yeah, you would get coalitions, and Sint Maarten would be part of those coalitions to help a government in place. So Sint Maarten really, under the Netherlands Antilles, governed itself to a great degree. But there's more to governing of a country than helping the economy develop. In fact, with the development of the economy, other things come into play as well. Infrastructure needs to be put in place. Now, we didn't do bad with that either, because we developed the airport, we developed the cruise harbor, the cruise ship harbor, and so we proved in certain areas we could handle it. We could handle the infrastructure. But there's more to governing than those aspects. Those are the hard parts of government, but the soft parts of government, social issues, medical issues, insurances, pensions, and sufficient income for people to live, dealing with crime, not only in the sense of locking people up, but in the sense of preventing it. Those are important challenges for our country, and we were still in a learning curve as far as that is concerned, and we still are, in my opinion.
It was a time of preparation. It was a time of setting up the basics, the structure for us to assume our responsibilities and tasks once we left the constellation of the Netherlands Antilles. We gave lectures, we prepared booklets, and there were civil servants who were so passionate about involving the civic community, community councils, the schools, where we gave lectures, churches. And I have to mention one of those persons again was Dorothy Lake, for example, when she worked together with us at the Bureau for Constitutional Affairs. At the time, Commissioner Westcott was the Commissioner of Constitutional Affairs. And we involved the kids, we involved the schools. So on a so consistent basis that now 10 years after, so after we achieved it, I miss that. I miss the continuity of the involvement of our people, whether it is in schools or with civic community, with regards to the process of this new status that once you achieved it, that we need to continue working hard and fighting hard to increase our level of service to the people, but also increase our level of autonomy in how we took decisions. You know, are they done in a transparent way? Are the budgets really balanced? But that's my period of 2003, 2007, where this drive, this notion of, yes, we can do it, but we have to do it together, and we have to do it in an open and transparent way. Not doing it because the Netherlands want it. No, we do it because we can and we should, because we have a responsibility towards the next generation of Sint Maarteners to aspire to hold a high office, to aspire to take decisions that are good for your own future, but also securing the future of those who have been there before, like our pensioners.
Those years, so between 2000 and 2005, were really years that we got so many disappointments in terms of looking for that status for Sint Maarten. Why? Because we were sort of the voice in the wilderness about we need constitutional change, kingdom government, we need to talk to you about the choice made by the people of Sint Maarten. During those years, a lot of attention was paid to the cooperation between the Windward Islands, so Saba, Sint Eustatius, and Sint Maarten. It took about 5 years after the referendum on Sint Maarten in 2000 before all of the other islands of the Netherlands Antilles, so all our sister islands, also had their referendum. The two last ones were Curacao and St. Eustatius in 2005. So I want to go back a moment to the period before the other islands had their referendum, and then the choices were clear, had become clear. And the first reaction to Sint Maarten's referendum outcome of 2000 was, especially from the Dutch politicians, the kingdom government, etc., absolutely not. I can still hear the voices echoing in my mind, like from Minister Gijs de Vries. No separate status for Sint Maarten. Don't come with it. I remember traveling along with Antillian delegations, of course, because we were still part of them. And the Dutch politicians at that time refused St. Maarten's entry into the meeting room. I recall myself sitting outside in the lobby, having been part of a delegation of the Netherlands Antilles traveling to The Hague, and we were not allowed because we were not on that level to have discussions with the kingdom/Dutch government. So those years, 2000, 2005, were particularly frustrating in terms of getting something out of what the people had voted for in 2000. We developed different sketches as to how we could see St. Maarten's new status working. We developed a blueprint of cooperation, a so-called Windward Island Economic Union paper for the cooperation between Sabre, St. Maarten, and Statia. But that didn't get any kind of support because, again, the islands did not speak out on their constitutional future until the last ones in 2005. So as of 2005, the discussions now started in earnest because all the 5 islands had a mandate by or from their population to seek a new status. And so during that time, as I mentioned, I have been primarily serving in a government position, and thus as Commissioner of Constitutional Affairs, I was very, very much involved with the process of seeking the attainment of country status.
The real key to getting everybody off first base was that everybody talked about, yes, we want to get out, yes, we want to step out in the Netherlands Antilles, and I'm talking, the dissatisfaction was everywhere. Even Curacao. I should tell you that at that time, the contributions, financial contributions that Sint Maarten made to the Netherlands Antilles, net surpassed whatever the Netherlands Antilles paid here, and was sufficient to cover the deficits of the budgets of Bonaire, Sabre, and Statia together. So Curacao, although they're saying they are, because one of their reasons and political things that they use in Curacao is that we don't have any money in government because we spend all our money on the smaller islands, which was completely untrue. And it was shown Sint Maarten actually was the one covering the budgets of Sabre, Statia, and Bonaire, and make a net contribution to central government. So although Curacao benefited from the Netherlands Antilles, no question about it, but they too started saying, we want out of the Netherlands Antilles because the other governments are using up all our money. I've been on TV programs in Curacao discussing this, showing this, but at a certain moment when I became Minister of Finance, I went to the Island Council, to the Executive Council of Curacao, and says, okay, it's being said this, you had committed that at the Bonaire conference. When are you going to keep a referendum? because as long as you don't keep that referendum in which the people of the island expresses what it wants to achieve, it's only going to be talk by politicians. Sint Maarten had already kept its referendum in 2000, and 60% of the people voted for stepping out of the Netherlands Antilles, but no other island had done so. So I saw that I could not be successful in this mission unless I get every island to keep a referendum. And so I succeeded in convincing Curacao to keep a referendum. And lo and behold, the people in Curacao voted to step out of the Netherlands Antilles. So did Bonaire. So did Saba. I think the only island that voted to stay in the Netherlands Antilles is Sint Eustatius. But at any rate, once that basis had been struck, that each island had kept their referendum, actually it became a done deal. Because if the people say they want out, who are you as a politician say, no, you're not going to take them out? And that's what happened. That was the key to get the desire of the people of Sint Maarten with its referendum 2000 to get that realized, because after the other countries held their referendum, and it took me, believe it or not, approximately 30 conferences. And when I say 30 conferences, each conference, each island sent its delegation. And that delegation consists, Curacao used to come with members of government, members of parliament, members of unions, in each and every one of those meetings we held.
Then in 2006, I was asked again to become Minister of Constitutional Affairs, Constitutional and Home Affairs. Actually, the portfolio is Home Affairs, which from the Antilles dealt with Coast Guard, archives, personnel matters, a varied matters of almost like whatever was left over from all the other portfolios were dumped in this one portfolio, as well as constitutional matters. Because my major charge in 2006 became transfer to the best of your ability all that was in the Netherlands Antilles that was for Sint Maarten. So I was charged with transferring laws, with transferring goods, with seeing to it that real estate was booked properly, and the negotiations for the upcoming constitutional situation. We did that. Like I said, I took office 2006, and we succeeded by 10-10-10, 2010. That was a full term of office plus, let's say, 9-10 months of 2010. So what I did was I led the Antillean delegation in terms of the negotiations with Holland. At that point in time, everybody had made their referendums, and Statia had decided it wanted to stay in the Antilles, which became a problem because you can't stay in something that don't exist. If everybody leaves the Netherlands Antilles, actually Statia would be the only one leaving. But that technicality is still a problem nowadays, because what Holland did, Holland waved away Statia's wish. No, you're going to be a public entity like Saba and Bonaire. Statia has never felt comfortable with that because they didn't really want to become an entity, a gemeente, or whatever. But they had no choice because there wasn't any Antilles left for them to stay in. Informing the Caribbean, it was a sad task. Huh? We were informing the Caribbean that we were leaving. And nobody could really understand. I remember I had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Trinidad, and he took 2 hours arguing with me to ask me why we were so crazy and stupid to go and mash up the Antilles. Particularly the English-speaking islands, because bear in mind, they basically went through the same thing West Indian Federation, associated statehood, to the West Indian Federation, to independence. So they're saying, yeah, we understand your breakup, but couldn't you learn from us? And what, some saying, hey, the same way maybe it happened, because at a certain point in time, in the West Indian Federation, Barbados didn't want to, it's a small island, they didn't want to take Jamaica's dominance and Trinidad's involvement. So it broke up.
We were going around in the same circles for the last 9 years. It didn't work. So I proposed we change direction, and I also agreed that let's pick a date, because if we don't pick a date, we would always find a reason to put it off. If you book a flight, you know I have to be at the airport on Wednesday. And it's the same thing here, and because of political developments in Holland, when there was an election upcoming and we didn't know what the outcome would be, and we were fearing that those who might get in power may not have been friendly towards us, we pushed and we agreed, let's pick the date 10-10-10.
10-10-10 to me was a further step in development, a step towards self-government, self-reliance. What I mean by that, that we could try to do it ourselves. And we don't want to really rely too much on other people. All countries in the world have relied on somebody or some other country at some point in time in their history. So we need not be ashamed that we have relied or we are relying on another country. However, when you give up your right to self-reliance, it isn't just a matter like I hear nowadays in the propaganda, oh, you can't eat autonomy, you can't eat this. Well, do we accept to reduce ourselves to beggars, parasites? Because if I can't decide what I'm going to do, I can't decide what I'm going to eat, because somebody else is going to tell me what I'm eating, how to eat, how much I should get, what I could do. When you look at the proposals that Holland are today making, nothing new that I could see that would be something so strange that I could say, well, hey boy, that's something brand new. Then the question comes up, why can't I do it myself? You got an entity who's going to sell shares in our government-owned companies? We don't need a government entity for that. We can do that ourselves.
One of the most critical steps that I took on behalf of my party at the time, was to establish the office of the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman office today is one of the high councils of state, so since 10-10-10. But before that, between 2003 and 2007, we worked extremely hard to introduce this institution to Sint Maarten. Only Curaçao had an ombudsman at the time. And that office did a phenomenal work in terms of giving the people access to government when they felt wrong. Because before that, there was nothing. You had to go to courts and spend a lot of money with lawyers. While with this institution, I was very conscious of that, would give everyone, rich, poor, black, white, resident, everyone the same access to this institution to be heard on issues that they felt that they were wronged on. So that's a very critical point that was, for me, a turning point in introducing, at the time, the first ever initiative law, which was the Ombudsman law, that draft ordinance, ever before.
Moments, if you want to call them critical moments or highlights or interesting moments, yeah, there were many. But there were some of them that stood out. And I can remember during like the final round of discussions in Holland, the then State Secretary, or the Minister Ank Bijleveld, we were at this meeting. And the people, because that's one of the other things that people don't know with the whole political development. It is not usually the politician who dictates what is happening. You have the Directorate of Kingdom Relations, for instance, and they are the hardliners. They are the ones who write those policies. They decide this is how we're going to treat St. Maarten, or this is how we're going. So whether Knops is there or not there, whether Peter, Paul, or Mary is there, that management is who press the buttons. And I can remember when we had it sort of all wrapped up, new conditions came on the table again, a new direction. I said, no, this is it. I have enough and I'm done. I said, negotiations are over. I'm catching the first plane and I'm going home because this is unacceptable. And I remembered we were in the restaurant, in the conference room where we were. We had took a break for lunch, like a quick bite. And I was having some fried chicken wings and fries. And I'm sitting at the bar stool. And Mrs. Bielefeld came and sat next to me. She said, William, I understood there's a crisis. You want to break this thing up. I said, I don't want to break it up, but I had enough. I'm not taking anymore. And she leaned over at my plate and she took a French fry and she stuck it in her mouth and she started to talk. And then she said, may I? I said, of course, go ahead. And she took some more and we were there. If anybody walked in, they would not believe if you want to call it, two opponents in a political wrangling. And she said, no, I understand your concerns. Please, don't walk away. We're going to fix this. And whether it was their strategy to see how far they can push, how much they can get, it didn't work. And if you want to call it that it was my reverse psychology to say I'm packing my bags, I had enough, if you want to call it that, then that worked.
Let's say the Constitution of St. Maarten. The Constitution of St. Maarten, which we all know today, and you hear on radio a lot of debate and discussion about the Constitution. It was one of the first documents that we prepared en route to country status. I remember fondly presenting the first draft in my capacity as chairman of the Work Group of Constitution, presenting the first draft to the political steering group at the time, comprised of Sarah Westcott Williams, William Marlin, and Vance James Jr. And the feeling within the community, hey, we are on our way to achieving country status. And that was in 2003. It will take 7 more years before we got there. But in the discussions on the Constitution, there were quite a bit of sessions locally where we had information sessions to the public. And in doing so, the many questions we received, but also within the Work Group of Constitutional Affairs, and as well as the design group that drafted the Constitution. There was, for example, a question which was the question of adding in the Constitution a definition of who is a Sint Maartener. All right, that was a very significant discussion where that was concerned. You also had discussions on issues like, for example, at a roundtable conference, where you had a discussion on the introduction of constitutional review, which made basically all laws on St. Maarten subject to the Constitution, that they are not allowed to be in conflict with the Constitution. And at the Roundtable Conference in December of 2008, the heavy debate between the Netherlands delegation and the Sint Maarten delegation, because within the Kingdom of the Netherlands, constitutional review is a new phenomenon. And Sint Maarten was coming with this new phenomenon, and the Netherlands was giving pushback. And again, there Sint Maarten persisted to ensure that today we have a constitutional court to be able to review laws against the Constitution. So the Constitution was quite an interesting document on its route towards its final preparation or finalization. And I remember the last meeting that Dennis Richardson, Robert Venix, and myself attended in The Hague to defend a number of, or to address a number of questions that the Kingdom Council of Ministers had with respect to the Constitution before giving their consent, and having that discussion within that technical group just before the discussions in the Kingdom Council of Ministers. So, and having realized and getting the Constitution finally approved, I think that was a major, or I should say a pivotal moment actually in the overall movement towards attaining country status.
Coming up next, we have two performances by Tamara Groeneveld and the National Institute of Arts, NIA.
Can you imagine how sweet it would be if there were no walls to restrict us in this territory? Can you imagine how sweet it would be if there were no walls to restrict us in this territory? We could implement new and innovative ways to boost our economy and not solely rely on tourism to feed our families. Locals would own more businesses and we would support our own, not just because we produce good quality services and products, but because it's also homegrown. And we could own the majority of the stores in town. There would be fewer homeless people on the streets, and there would be no such thing as haters because we would greet everyone that we meet. And you could still pick cherries in Bishop Hill, Jungut, and Chevries. And everyone's backyard would reap provision and guava berries. We wouldn't be under an imposed scrutiny, but uniformly work together for the people to build this country. We would produce and export salt once more, and there would be no such thing as an embargo. Our people would be able to rise from the mental shackles of slavery. And like the Black Wall Street, we would have money circulate in our community. Anguilla fishermen would be able to cross the waters, and on market Wednesdays and Saturdays, cash will be just as good as barter. We would be able to go to Coconut Grove and of course drink fresh coconut water, and wouldn't import all of our food. And of course, farmers would have livestock to slaughter. We would embrace our cultural identity, wear our natural hair, and of course, modernize the folkloric wear. Our young would know our traditional recipes and remedies, and the elderly wouldn't die with all the valuable knowledge that was shared for many, many centuries. A world without walls and a Sint Maarten without borders, able to write her own destiny and not take directives from various world orders.
As we conclude these reflective interviews, we asked each of our guests to share their thoughts on how they viewed the outlook for our country, St. Maarten.
We know that as a people, based on the past 20 years, but even before, that that a Sint Maarten spirit is a resilient and strong one. We know that, and it is important that we don't take that for granted. Moving forward, we can continue to build on that spirit. However, we also need to, as current as well as the future generations, we need to reach or come to the stage where we join our forces to come with a strategic approach towards the next decade. An approach that specifically looks at the needs of the people, at what the will of the people is, and together, and there will be differences from time to time, but we need to establish a number of core issues that, as a people, we want to achieve together for the next decade. And in that respect, I believe that if we do that, and I'm sure that we can, because the route to 10-10-10 was an example that we can. I'm very optimistic that as a people we would continue to grow and progress, and as such, I believe that is why today we can look at 10-10-10 country status and say a happy and resilient celebration of country status.
You hit the ball with a bat, a double home run. Okay. You know, that is something that I hate to say, I've said it many times. Politics is not only for the politicians who sit in Parliament. In Parliament is not for the politicians who are minister. And politics is also not for those who walk around them, who go with them all over. You know, they call themselves politicians. Politics is for all of us. I feel that the youth of Sint Maarten was left out for years, left out of what's happening.
I'm hopeful for many reasons. I mean, you mentioned the youth a while ago. I am impressed by what our youth know today, can do today, which in our day, you had no idea those things are possible. They're doing it, okay? From that point of view, I'm hopeful. What's needed is some kind of structuring and guidance towards a goal. That goal has to be transparent, attainable, and we will be able to meet the basic things that our country needs. But you gotta have that plan, and you gotta be serious with the plan and not make a plan, put it aside, work on it consistently. We will get there.
Let's revisit, if we want to revisit, not the goal that we expected to come out of the sky, but in how far are we doing a half-decent job in managing our own affairs. And push on for the next 20 years and see what I'm going to have. Because time is going to go by. Just now it's going to be, boy, it's 20 years. The question is to the new generation or the current generation is, what have you done for your further development? Even if you say 10-10-10 was lousy, weak, what have you done since then to strengthen your development?
There's still many things that we were not able to accomplish in the way and time frame that we envisaged in October 2010. But if we recognize the setbacks with which we started and the unexpected events that have struck us since that time, hurricanes and the like, I am even more convinced of the resilience of a people who really want to make their country work and want to make it a better place for generations to come.
I mentioned speaking truth to power, and I don't like to gloss over stuff. I would rather encourage our citizens to take stock of indeed where we are, and encourage our political leaders, our members of parliament, to work in the best interest of all of our citizens. So, no, it's not a happy period, because 10 years is just a speck in the entire spectrum of our history books. So I look forward to the next 10 years. I look forward to the next day in terms of improving in what we have and excelling in what we have. Mediocrity doesn't have a place in greatness. Devotion, passion, hope, faith, those have a place in our society and in greatness. And that is what I would like to wish for the people of Sint Maarten. Take pride in this country, in this beautiful island called Sint Maarten. I do. I will continue to do so. And God willing, if there's any opportunity to continue making that contribution, I would gladly pitch in.
And if Holland wants Sint Maarten to succeed, they're not doing it the right way. We are being punished because we chose to become a country in the kingdom. And if you want us out, say so. But don't come with that hypocrisy of we are creating an entity to help you. No, I got to help me. I got to decide for me and you help me. Not you deciding for me what I got to wear, when I got to wear it, how I got to wear it. No, that's not helping me. So, as I said before, what I want for Sint Maarten is for us to become a truly autonomous, independent country in the Caribbean, just like St. Kitts, just like Dominica, just like Antigua.
I honestly don't see why we shouldn't be happy that we've reached this far, but at the same time I acknowledge it's not far enough. You know, that we need to make the rest of the steps. We need to reach a level in which we are all proud of Sint Maarten and where it stands and how it is functioning and governing, even though it might not be the end situation. In fact, I don't believe there's an end situation when it comes to government. Every country is in development. It continues. The United States at this moment is in a great battle about where it should go. It doesn't seem to be finished. The Netherlands is also changing as well. So that is a dream that probably will never come true. But the confidence and the attitude of striving for excellence, that is what I would like to add to our situation at the moment. I wish us as Sint Maarteners the best, and that we move forward, that we don't lose confidence in ourselves, that we maintain the confidence in ourselves. And we've proven so many times, we even don't realize it, how resilient this population are. We need sometimes people to come from outside to tell us how good we are. Sint Maarten was the economic wonder of the Caribbean a few years ago. So it is possible, but we need to focus and we need to want it and we need to do what is necessary to get it done. I give freely and willingly to my country. That's Sint Maarten. Yeah, I'm crazy about this little rock. Yes.
Sint Maarten is a friendly island. Sint Maarten is a unique island. Friend side and Dutch side, the only island like this. A governor, a president, the only island like this. Collectivité and parliament, the only island like this. Sint Maarten is a friendly island. Sint Maarten is a unique island. French side and Dutch side, the only island like this. A governor, a president, the only island like this. Collectivité and parliament, the only island like this. There are many nations on this island. There are many nations.
are mighty, we are strong. One nation under God. New beginnings, history in the making. 10 is the number of perfection. Let us rise up as a nation. As one. We're ready. We're ready. New island. New island. New island. United together in 10, 10, 10. Come on, St. Maarten, celebrate. And we are praise. Martin people, let's celebrate. Finally, we are a country. Finally, we have our liberty. This is our season. Hold your head up high, Sint Maarten. 10, 10, 10. Oh, yes. Get ready for 10, we're ready. New island, new country in 10, 10, 10. One nation, united, one island. 10, 10, 10. Hooray for 10, 10, 10. This is our country. This is for we. Yes, hooray for Sint Maarten. Come on, celebrate. This is our season, our victory. We can change the Caribbean. We can change this Caribbean. We can change this generation. Yes, we can. United, we can stand up for our country. So with your hands, celebrate our victory. Oh yeah. Get ready for 10, 10, 10. We ready. New island, new country in 10, 10, 10. Sint Maarten. Get ready for 10, 10, 10. One people, new country in 10, 10, 10. United together in 10, 10, 10. One island. Let us celebrate.
On behalf of the government of St. Maarten, I am Rolika Roach. I bid you farewell and thank you for joining us and watching the 10th anniversary virtual commemoration of 10-10-10 under the theme Decadal Growth and Progress.